The stillness of the surveillance room was broken only by the cold, faint hum of electricity. A grid of 9 security camera feeds flickered across the monitors, showing sterile hallways, motionless rooms, and finally, settling on the figure of Edward Caldwell. He was a stern, wealthy widower in his early 40s, sharply dressed but consumed by exhaustion and grief. He muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse, "I built this house to keep you safe. I won't lose you too." His gaze cut to the screen, showing the largest room in the house. There, sitting motionless in his state-of-the-art wheelchair by a floor-to-ceiling window, was his teenage son, Noah. The light of dusk washed over Noah's pale face, which had shown no expression since the accident. The sound of powerful waves outside the oceanfront mansion contrasted sharply with the cold hum of the technology inside. The silence was suffocating. A discreet chime interrupted the vigil. Lucy Santos, a gentle, soft-spoken woman in her early 30s, arrived at the mansion for a housekeeping job. She was warm, practical, and unpretentious, a stark splash of life against the cold, gray walls. Edward's assistant met Lucy in the foyer. She came highly recommended. The assistant explained to Edward via earpiece. "Works quietly, no fuss." Edward barely glanced at the screen showing Lucy. He muttered into his mic, "We'll see." He gave Lucy his final, concise orders, his voice carrying the authority of his wealth. "Follow the rules. Stay out of my office. And never touch my son's things." Lucy looked up, her warm eyes meeting his cold ones momentarily. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice quiet. She nodded, accepting the impossible terms, and began her work, retreating into the fortress of Edward's fear. Edward returned to his wall of monitors. His surveillance as control was an obsessive ritual, replacing the comfort of human connection. He watched Lucy carefully. She moved with quiet grace, wiping down counters, dusting the portrait of his late wife, Lila Caldwell, who had died in the same accident that had paralyzed Noah. She paused often. Sometimes she hummed softly an old, melodic lullaby. Sometimes she stopped by Noah's door and spoke softly to him, even though he never replied. Edward frowned, zooming in on her face through the security feed. "No one's that kind without wanting something," he scoffed, masking his suspicion with the certainty of cynicism. But later that night, he missed the small miracle. When Lucy paused at Noah's door, telling a quiet story about the ocean, a flicker crossed Noah's face. Noah's finger twitched slightly toward her voice. The movement was so involuntary, so tiny, that only the most dedicated observer, or the most desperate father, would have caught it. But Edward, obsessively watching for threats, missed the seed of transformation entirely. He dismissed the entire interaction as coincidence and ordered the cameras to be recalibrated. The next day, the small change was impossible to ignore. Lucy, entering Noah's room to clean the window, paused. She held a small, hand-carved wooden bird ornament. "I found this at the market, Noah," she said softly, placing it gently on his nightstand. "For company." He looked like someone who listens to the ocean. Noah's eyes, dull and fixed on the window, shifted, momentarily tracking the movement of the ornament. Edward watched the whole exchange on his monitor. His heart hammered. He immediately called the security team. "She's overstepping. Remove that thing." But before the security could act, Noah cried. Not a physical cry, but a small, heartbreaking sound that caught in his chest. A whimper. The first sound of genuine emotion in a year. Edward, trembling, dismissed the security team. He was torn between absolute anger at Lucy for violating his rules and terrifying guilt at having nearly suppressed that first fragile spark of emotion in his son. Later that evening, Lucy committed her final, most dangerous violation. She was cleaning near a large, framed portrait of Lila. Her expression shifted from professional focus to profound grief. She clutched the small silver locket she wore beneath her uniform and whispered something under her breath. Edward zoomed in. He watched as Lucy carefully adjusted the portrait. Then, she clutched her locket and whispered, tears filling her eyes, "I promised I'd look after them, Lila. I won't fail you again." A profound realization hit Edward, a wave of cold dread washing over his cynicism. He remembered the hospital, the accident, the immediate grief. He remembered the nurse who had cared for Lila in those final days. The woman with kind, warm eyes. Lucy. Lucy was not just a housekeeper. She was the final promise he had ignored. He had hired the one person who knew his greatest secret and his greatest pain. The discovery of Lucy's connection to Lila made Edward's obsession unbearable. He reviewed every clip of Lucy by Lila's portrait. He watched the footage of her placing the small bird in Noah's room and the tiny cry that followed its removal. He saw the truth clearly. Lucy's quiet compassion was not a threat. It was a vessel of grace that he was desperately trying to repel. He knew he should confront her, but the thought of speaking the words, of acknowledging the depth of his loss and his mistake, paralyzed him. He stayed locked in his surveillance room, letting the tension build, letting the knowledge of her secret connection gnaw at his control. The next day, the emotional conflict reached a breaking point. Lucy continued her work despite the tension, her soft humming an accusation against the sterile silence of the mansion. She paused by Lila's photo again. This time, she took off the locket and placed it gently beside the frame. Edward, watching from his monitor, zoomed in. He saw the flash of the silver locket opening, revealing a faded photo inside. Lila smiling, holding baby Noah. The sight of the woman and child, so full of life, was a terrible contrast to the empty house. Edward raced out of his surveillance room. He found Lucy in the hall, her back to him, her shoulders slumped with weariness. "Lucy," he demanded, his voice hard, "you think you can sneak around in my house? You think you can use my dead wife to manipulate my son?" Lucy turned, startled but calm. Her eyes were wet with unshed tears. "I wasn't manipulating anyone, Mr. Caldwell. I knew Lila. She was my friend. I promised her I would look after him. You are not his mother." Edward screamed, his grief finally boiling over. "You're here to clean, not to give him false hope. You violated my trust, and you violated every rule I set. And you think rules keep him alive?" Lucy countered, her voice rising with quiet strength. "Your rules are walls, Mr. Caldwell, and they are killing him." Edward stared at her, breathing heavily. He saw not a maid, but a woman driven by a fierce, protective love. The sight of her integrity was intolerable. "You're fired," he announced, the word echoing brutally down the long hallway. "Get out. I don't want to see your face again." Lucy stood still for a moment, her eyes filled with pain, her dignity intact. She nodded slowly, accepted the punishment, and walked quietly toward the exit. Then, a sound broke the silence. A small, weak voice called faintly from Noah's room. "Don't go." Edward froze. Noah had spoken, the first words in a year. He turned, rushing to Noah's room. Noah was crying, his pale face streaked with tears, his hand extended faintly toward the empty doorway where Lucy had disappeared. The guilt was a physical sickness. Edward sat by the wheelchair, holding his son, but Noah only cried harder, turning away from him. The mansion fell silent again. The silence was heavier now, weighted by Noah's tears and the ghost of Lucy's humming. Edward's monitors showed Noah staring blankly at her empty chair. He noticed a plate of food near Noah's wheelchair. Why isn't he eating? Guilt gnawing at him. He knew the answer. Lucy was the only one who could coax Noah to eat. Alone in his surveillance room, consumed by the crushing aftermath of his choice, Edward replayed the security footage one last time. He zoomed in on Lucy holding the locket. He saw the photo inside, Lila and baby Noah. He saw the tiny, folded piece of paper she'd placed by Lila's portrait before she left. He found the piece of paper. It was a note, written in Lila's shaky hand before the accident. "Lucy, please, if anything happens to me, promise you'll watch over my boys. Protect Noah from the silence." The truth hit him. Lucy wasn't just Lila's friend. She was his wife's final, desperate provision. The fortress he had built was meant to protect Noah, but Lucy was the only person who could truly save him. Grace didn't need permission to enter. It just waited for hearts to open. The revelation was a hammer blow against the walls of Edward's cynicism. He had spent his immense fortune trying to control grief, and in doing so, he had fired the only person who could offer healing. I built a fortress to keep out pain, but all I did was lock it in. He had to find her. The search that followed was clumsy, desperate, and utterly humbling. He couldn't rely on his corporate network. He had to search the places where a humble woman like Lucy would go. He drove through the misty coastal town, checking every cleaning agency, every bus stop, every small diner. He found her late that evening, leaving a small, brightly lit church shelter, clutching a worn handbag. "Lucy!" Edward shouted, leaping out his car. He didn't care that he was drenched in the rain-soaked streets, or that his expensive suit was ruined. Lucy stopped, shocked. Edward stepped toward her, trembling, no longer the powerful CEO, but just a desperate, broken man. He knelt in the wet asphalt before her. "I was wrong about you, and about everything," he choked out, the words thick with shame. "I fired the one person who understood Noah. I fired the promise Lila made. Please come home." His voice cracked. "He needs you. I need you." Lucy's face softened, tears finally tracing paths through the rain on her cheeks. "I never wanted to leave, Mr. Caldwell, but you built a prison for your heart. I can't work in a place where I'm treated like a thief for caring." "I know," Edward whispered. "I was afraid. I was so afraid of losing him that I became a monster. I used the cameras to control, but all I did was blind myself to the simple truth." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded note. "Lila asked you to protect him from the silence. You were the only one who tried to honor that." Lucy took the note, reading Lila's handwriting through her tears. Forgiveness, born of shared grief and empathy, settled between them. "I promised Lila I would look after him, Mr. Caldwell. I will honor that promise." But the walls come down. Edward stood, his spine straightening not with arrogance, but with conviction. All of them. No more walls. Not in this house. Not in my heart. Back at the mansion, Lucy returned to Noah's side. The immense house felt instantly lighter, warmer. Noah, pale and frail, whispered the words Edward had longed to hear. "You came back." Lucy knelt beside him, smiling through tears. "Of course I did, Carino." Edward watched from the doorway, his chest tightening. He saw Lucy take Noah's small, cold hand in hers. She hummed the old lullaby. Slow, painstaking minutes passed. Then, slowly, deliberately, Noah moved his other hand, a powerful, voluntary movement, reaching toward Edward. Edward gasped, trembling, unable to hold back his tears. He rushed to Noah's side, kneeling again. "It's okay, son," Edward whispered, stroking his hair. "You can let go of fear now. Mama sent help." It was the moment of full release. The walls came down. Later that evening, Edward walked the sterile hallways, pulling small tools from his pockets. He began switching off every security monitor, one by one. The wall of screens went dark, giving way to the gentle reflections of candlelight. He was removing the physical symbols of his fear. He walked to Lila's portrait, placing her photo on a nearby table beside Lucy's silver locket. He looked at the locket, the symbol of their connection and her enduring promise. "You kept your promise, Lucy," he whispered. The next day, the mansion began to breathe again. The surveillance room was cleared, replaced by an open, sun-filled study. Laughter, real laughter, not the echoes of corporate success, began to bounce off the marble walls. Edward took a substantial sabbatical from his work. He dedicated his days to Noah and to learning how to live in the light. A quiet montage showed the true healing. Lucy teaching Noah to paint with adaptive brushes, the canvas filling with vibrant colors. Edward helping Noah learn to maneuver his wheelchair across the gravel garden path for the first time, his face focused not on profits, but on his son's small effort. The small wooden bird sitting by the open window, its shadow stretching across the floor as sunlight filled the room. The dining room, once silent, now filled with the sound of Edward reading aloud. Not corporate documents, but fairy tales. Edward placed his wife's framed portrait on a central living room table, beside the newly placed silver locket. The locket remained, a tangible reminder of the promise Lucy honored. "I thought healing meant forgetting the pain," Edward whispered, his voice full of peace as he looked at Lila's photo. "But sometimes grace comes to remind us that even the broken can love again." The final image was the culmination of his transformation. He sat in the garden, helping Noah paint. The ocean breeze carried the sound of their shared laughter. He looked at Lucy, who was watering the small, newly planted garden. She was no longer a servant, but the essential heart of the home. "I built walls to keep the pain out, but love still found its way in, quietly, patiently, like grace disguised as a stranger," he thought. Edward leaned over, placing a hand gently on Noah's shoulder. He was focused only on his son, on the vibrant color Noah was adding to the canvas. His world was finally whole. He knew that the real challenge was maintaining this focus, ensuring that the walls of control never went back up. But looking at Noah, smiling and painting, and hearing Lucy humming nearby, he knew he would never go back to the cold silence of his fortress. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit subscribe for more emotional, true-to-life stories about hope, grace, and second chances. Like this video and comment below. What moment in Edward's journey proved he finally let go of fear? Share this with someone who needs to remember that love still finds a way in, even when you build the walls high.